All right, advantages, disadvantages, and how this model is actually applied in practice to finish us off talking about this model, and then just the rest of the chapter is basically spent comparing repurchases to cash dividends. All right, so advantages of this model. The biggest thing it does, first of all, it gives us an actual model to follow. The book doesn't say that, but I'm saying that. You know, like capital structure, we're kind of like left sitting there like, all right, that's great in theory. That's about all we got. This, I at least have some mathematical formula to plug into to get a rough idea of, you know, how much I could, in theory, pay out as dividends while making sure I'm prioritizing projects. On top of that, it does minimize stock issues, like issuing new stock, which then also minimizes flotation costs and those negative signals that come along with issuing new stock, right? Because the way it minimizes this is that by me making sure that I can cover my projects with retained earnings, that keeps me from having to issue stock, right? That I have my two sources of equity, internal and external. And that if I'm able to rely on my internal sources of equity, well, then I don't have to go issue new external equity and all of the direct and indirect costs that come with that, right? So that is a good, definitely. Now notice in the above average state of the world, the firm would still be short $30 million of equity funding if they want to stick to their target capital structure, and so they would have to go issue new stock in that above average state of the world. But in the average state and the poor state, they are making sure that they don't have to issue stock by instead making sure they're relying on retained earnings and using that first to cover the projects and then to provide a distribution to shareholders. Disadvantages, though. It does result in, as I already mentioned, very variable dividends and distributions. So we went from 36 to 18 to 0, depending on the state of the world. And let's pretend those weren't states of the world. Let's pretend one was 2016, one was 2017, and one was 2018, right? My dividends are jumping all around. Not good. That jumping around is going to lead to that second one there. It's going to send conflicting signals to my shareholders. You know, 1 year dividends are up, next year they're down, next year they're nothing. They're like, I don't know what's going on with this firm, right? And it could be that the net income isn't changing at all. It could just mean they have different investment opportunities from year to year, and that some years when investment opportunities are high, we don't have as much money to pay out. And other years when investment opportunities are low, that we have more to pay out. All right, try explaining that to shareholders. Increases risk in the sense that, you know, you are sending those conflicting signals. You are also not leaving yourself a lot of like extra for the next year, let's say, right? You're basically like devoting almost all this money to projects and then you're just paying out the rest. You're not giving yourself much, let's say wiggle room, I guess, right? Kind of thing. Yeah. And you run the risk of, you know, maybe you pay out too much and then the next year additional investment opportunities, you know, come about. But because you just paid out whatever you had left over from the previous year, you have nothing coming in from the previous year to help you fund the next year, right? Like maybe like if this was, let's say, instead of poor, average, and above average, this is the years 1, 2, and 3. You know, here in year 3, I'd be stuck missing $30 million when in the past 2 years, I paid out, what is that, $54 million to my shareholders as distributions. Well, maybe if I wouldn't have paid out so much to my shareholders before, I would have that $30 million. Right. And so it becomes maybe not the best strategy in that sense. It also doesn't appeal to any specific clientele, right? Because some years I'm paying dividends, some years I'm not, some years I'm paying high dividends. I'm doing all kind of crazy stuff. So once again, we know we're not following our previous like theories of picking a clientele, sticking to it, making sure the dividends are stable, not sending out conflicting signals, So yeah, there's problems here. And so that leads us to how the model is actually used in practice. So it says, what would happen if a firm rigidly followed the residual model? Well, that's what I've kind of been illustrating this whole time. That, like I said, if this was years 1, 2, and 3 up here, it would lead to our distributions, dividends, repurchases, whatever, being all over the place. Right? There would be no concept of stability at all. And we know that's not good. Right? It goes directly to these disadvantages of the model. And so instead, what we think is that firms can use this model especially as a starting point, but that you don't do it for just 1 year at a time. You do it for an investment horizon. So let's say like for 5 years. You estimate your investment opportunities over the next 5 years. And then you use that information and your targeted capital structure. And what you do is you find the average distribution you could afford, right? So like here, I would average together 36, 18, and 0, right? That would give me 54 divided by 3, which is 18. Probably shouldn't have been able to do that in my head, but didn't trust myself. So on average, we would find here, if I would have paid 18, 18, and 18, I would have been able to, feasibly keep a stable dividend while still pursuing the investments I have available to me each year. And so, you do the same procedure, except you just do it over multiple years, take an average, target that average distribution ratio. And then that way you don't have these fluctuations from year to year to year. So it says firms should use the residual policy to help them set their long-run target distribution ratios, but not as a guide to any single, year by itself. You don't do this on a year-to-year basis. You do it on some type of rolling, like 5-year horizon, let's say. 5 years, again, is a special number. No, it's just a nice number. Sometimes 3 seems too many, 10 seems too long kind of thing. 5 is nice. Yeah. This also leads to what I mentioned earlier that a lot of firms actually do pursue, is what's called a low regular dividend plus extras policy. Why they do not have an abbreviation for that, I do not know. You think someone would at some point come up with something like LRDRP or something like that. I don't know. Maybe that's why no one's come up with an abbreviation, because there is none. All right, official definition that I don't have there, but it's pretty straightforward, just reading from the glossary, literally. Dividend policy in which a company announces a low regular dividend in the title or in the definition, right there in front of you. Low regular dividend that it is sure can be maintained. Like you must maintain this or die kind of thing. Like absolute 100% you will be able to keep this dividend. Then if you have extra funds available, that's the plus extras part of the policy, you can either designate a special dividend, which firms do, or you go out and you do some repurchasing. Simple as that. Cover your projects first. The way that you ensure that you do that is you set a nice, very low regular dividend that you are absolutely sure, like you're really setting like the really, really low bar for the class kind of thing. You set that super low bar so that everyone can cruise on through. And then if the firm has a little bit of extra money in a given year, you pay out a special dividend, you declare and you pay out a special dividend, and then you can also do a share repurchase as the other option. Studies have shown special dividends, while there's a signal sent to investors when firms increase their normal dividend, and then, there's also a signal when they cut it. Investors understand that when firms declare a special dividend, it is special. And so they don't like bake it into their expectations of the future. They see it as just like a one-time, like, oh, that's nice, the firm did extra well this year. But they don't get upset and negatively affect the stock price if in the next year they don't get that special dividend again. So that there's no like penalty or really downside for a firm pursuing this type of policy where they just set that nice low bar and then pay out like a bonus round if the year is really good. So we see a lot of companies basically follow this dividend policy. So that wraps up most of dividend policy. What we have left to talk about is some information about stock repurchases, or a little bit more information going in deeper to stock repurchases.